The trade relations front and center as India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is in Russia and will meet his Russian counterpart Sergey Lavrov today.
His visit comes amid tariff pressures from the U.S. Reports say the meeting between the top diplomats will also prepare the way for Russian President Vladimir Putin to visit India before the end of the year. Talks of a trilateral meeting between Russia, India and China also reportedly underway, as leaders of the three nations will be in Beijing next week for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, that's a regional bloc formed to counter American influence in Asia.
Russia expects to continue supplying oil to India despite warnings from the U.S. The Russian embassy in India touting a, quote, special mechanism that can ensure continued crude supplies to Delhi. A Moscow official said that the country will offer oil to New Delhi at a 5% discount to continue energy cooperation. It's also working on improving payment systems and removing trade barriers with New Delhi.
Washington has repeatedly accused India of funding Russia's war in Ukraine by buying its oil, a claim New Delhi denies. President Trump has imposed a retaliatory tariff of 25% on India, along with an additional 25% penalty for its purchase of Russian crude. India has become the second largest buyer of Russian oil since the Ukraine war began, sourcing more than 30% of its supplies from Moscow. And for insights on burgeoning ties between China, India and Russia, let's speak now with Sumit Ganguly, his senior fellow and director of the Huntington Program on strengthening U.S.-India relations at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Professor Ganguly, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. So we know India prefers to be non-aligned and has been cautious about China-dominated moves within BRICS, within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And given, all that's been happening, how strongly now is New Delhi reviewing its position, or do you expect India to remain cautious about taking sides?
Well, India is obviously piqued with the extraordinary tariffs that Trump has imposed on India, and in addition to that, has threatened another 25% tariffs for a total of 50% if India does not cease to buy Russian oil. And also, India is irritated with Trump's apparent tilt towards Pakistan, and a combination of these two factors has led India to turn back to a tried and true relationship with Russia, and simultaneously to try and reduce tensions with its Himalayan neighbor and rival, the People's Republic of China.
From Russia's perspective, Professor, I wonder how serious Moscow is about reviving this troika as a long-term project, or is it mainly a response to its isolation after the Ukraine war?
Oh, in large part, I think it has to do with its acute isolation after the Ukraine war. And this also harks back to an earlier Russian effort in the 1990s when Yevgeny Primakov, the foreign minister of Russia at the time, had talked about the need for a multipolar world. And India and China and Brazil and others had also chimed in. And various international relations scholars referred to this as soft balancing against overweening American power. So there is a lineage to this effort of balancing against American power, particularly at a time when the Trump administration is changing fairly well-established rules in the global order.
So, Professor, when you look at this triangle itself, China, India, and Russia, some analysts argue that Beijing inevitably has the most weight. I mean, do you see China emerging as the strongest pole here, perhaps even the winner of this alignment?
there is little or no question in my mind that China will emerge as the strongest of these three poles and will probably utilize the weakness of both Russia and India to advance its own interests. And I think it's a mistake on the part of India to think that making a tactical alignment with China will somehow induce the Trump administration to change its policies towards India.
China and Russia clearly want to counter US dominance, and you've just outlined the dangers for India. I'm wondering about the other BRICS members. I mean, there's Brazil, which also has a 50% tariff. There are other members like the UAE or Saudi Arabia. Are they all receptive to this idea of expanded economic cooperation? We're hearing about this Russian-led bloc that's talking to India about, I guess a trade deal. I mean, overall, do you see the other BRICS members being receptive, to this realignment, if you like?
I think a talk about a realignment is really premature because, to begin with, there are significant internal tensions amongst the BRICS. For example, China and India have a border dispute on which they have made little or no progress. Russia's economy is steadily shrinking. South Africa, beyond the southern cone of Africa, and on certain international issues on which it wants to have a voice, like, for example, at the International Criminal Court, is not a major economic player. And Brazil is dealing with its own problems with the Trump administration and is reeling from Trump's tariffs. Consequently, I think this talk about a convergence amongst the BRICS, the creation of a alternative global currency, is really a fanciful notion.
So you don't think Beijing is going to try and raise this, the challenge for dollar dominance again? Because look, however you see it, it's a fact that Trump has upended the entire trading system that we know. It ran on US dollar liquidity. It ran on predictability in so many ways. And yes, the US accounts for 25% of global GDP, but China, India, Brazil are in the top 10.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. China is leading the charge to undermine or challenge the US-dominated global order in multiple dimensions. But in a tragic way, Trump, for all his talk about making America great again, could become the architect of American decline and actually inadvertently bolster the capabilities of the People's Republic of China, even though that's not his intention. But many of his policies and choices will have perverse, unintended consequences, actually bolstering China's position in the global order.
So with that in mind, Professor, from Washington's point of view, how will this tightening cooperation be seen? Will the U.S. respond with tougher measures like more tariffs, or will they try diplomacy to keep a country like India from drifting too far?
One can only hope that more sage counsel will prevail in Washington and that more economic coercion will not be directed towards India. I think it would be a colossal error on the part of the Trump administration. Already, it has successfully undermined a degree of trust that had been built up since the days of the second administration of George W. Bush. And there was a bipartisan consensus in Washington that India mattered on multiple axes. Now the Trump administration for reasons best known to itself, is upending these assumptions, and far too few people in Congress are standing up to Trump and challenging some of the more intemperate choices that he's making.
Professor, you're an expert on India-U.S. ties and how they can be strengthened. So, how would you describe relations right now? Are you in despair, or do you see hope that they can be rebuilt again?
I certainly hope that they can be rebuilt again, particularly if the Trump administration changes its current policy choices. But at the moment, I must say, I have to use your word, I am despairing about the relationship, at least at the present time.
All right, Professor, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us on the show today. Sumit Ganguly is Senior Fellow and Director at the Huntington Program on Strengthening U.S.-India Relations at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University.